In September of 2021, I left my home at about 1:30 a.m. to make a drive to Pittsburgh, where I would catch an Amtrak train with my bicycle at about 5:20 a.m. to make my way to Washington, D.C. to start the C&O Canal Trail and Gap Trail from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh. The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Trail is 184.5 miles long, and the Great Allegheny Passage Trail is 150 miles long. I had made this trip once before, but this would be the first time I tried to do it by hammock camping. The C&O Canal has several free campsites along the way, spaced about 5 to 7 miles apart. What I wasn't certain before making this trip was how well each would be set up for hammocks, whether each would have enough trees for a good hang. I like sleeping in a hammock. I get a better sleep than I do in a tent. It's easier to pack also. Once arriving in Washington, D.C., you get the pleasure of riding through the National Mall to the beginning of the canal. The train was set to arrive at about 1:30 p.m., but as is usual for Amtrak, ran about an hour and 15 minutes late, giving me a late start. Thus, for the first day, I only had about half a day of riding. It was a pleasure to get to the canal. While it didn't rain this day, the canal was still wet from rain the days before. It wasn't deep mud though. It wasn't especially hot, but my first 2 days of riding were certainly muggy. There were a few spots along the trail where there were downed trees. Each was passable with a little bit of work. I'd ride only about 38 miles this first day to arrive at the Turtle Run campsite. These 2 trees are where I set up my hammock, but it was a bit late, so I didn't get a good picture of it or on video. The second day would take me from the Turtle Run campsite to the North Mountain campsite, about a 78-mile ride. And again, this day was not particularly hot, but it was muggy. Though I tried to hydrate throughout the trip, by the end of the day, I found out I hadn't done it enough. I got a few leg cramps. Along the canal, there are lock houses, aqueducts, locks, and of course several animals, whether it be deer, chipmunks, snakes. What I did find along the trail is that it was well set up for hammock camping. I'd say that there were a handful of sites that probably lacked enough trees. There were probably a handful of sites that were perfect, and the vast majority of the others were workable. One of the differences I've found between the Gap Trail and the C&O Canal Trail, both times I've ridden them, is that the people along the C&O Canal trails just seem a little bit more friendly. More good mornings and hellos. The C&O is, of course, a rougher trail to ride than the Gap. The Gap is smooth, and the C&O has ruts and roots and bumps. The North Mountain campsite was about 110 miles into the C&O. And while it wasn't a perfect setup, it worked for the hammock. Again, I got it set up a bit late, so it's a bit dark in the video. Each of the campsites has good access to the Potomac River, too. The third day would be my final day of riding the C&O, taking me into Cumberland, where the Gap Trail would begin. This day was planned to be a 76-mile ride. During this third day, it was primarily overcast, which unfortunately caused some problems in terms of getting clothes to dry. I'd say the trail surface is probably most rustic along the C&O this third day. I checked several of the other campsites and found sufficient trees for hammocks. I also found more downed trees. At the Paw Paw Tunnel, about 155 miles in, there was a detour as they were repairing the tunnel. The tunnel is amazing. I'm glad I was able to go through it the previous year. This detour required one to walk your bike some, as it was a bit steep and narrow. There were great views at the top of the mountain. And it was workable, just like backpacking. I was glad to come into Cumberland, where I'd stay at a hotel for the night and refresh and get some laundry done. And clean up my surly midnight special. On the fourth day, I would ride from Cumberland to Rockwood, where I would stay at the Husky Haven campsite, about a 44-mile ride. I got a little bit of a late start because waiting for a package to arrive at the hotel that I had ordered. The beginning of the Gap Trail out of Cumberland, as I think most people know, is a very gradual uphill to the Eastern Continental Divide. If you look at pictures or graphs of the trail, I think it exaggerates how steep this portion is. It's just a gradual incline, no worse than riding into a slight headwind. I can't say I prefer the Gap over the C&O or the C&O over the Gap, but one of the things about the Gap is there is a greater variety of views. There's more tunnels and bridges, overlooks, rivers. This fourth day would be cooler than the previous days, which was nice. The tunnels are not only interesting, but they are very cool to ride through. Refreshing. One approaches the Mason-Dixon line near the top of the climb. There's a nice area to overlook the mountains and have a brief rest. And then one comes to the Big Savage Tunnel. It's long, it has lights, but the darkness can become a little bit disorienting on a bike. And then the Eastern Continental Divide is the highest point of the Gap Trail. From there on out, it's a very, very gradual downhill. Hardly noticeable, but I think noticeable. There's fresh water in Myersdale to refresh in the water bottles. There's several deer that come across the trail if I'm quick enough to catch them, which is only a couple times. The Husky Haven campground is one of my favorite stops. I like the fact that they give you free wood with the campsite. It's got good views, and if you ask for a spot with trees for hammocks, they give it to you. My hammock is a Dutchware Chameleon. It's very comfortable. For the fifth day of the ride, I was originally planning to ride from Rockwood, where the Husky Haven campground is, to the Round Bottom campsite, which would have been about 55 miles. But they were calling for heavy rain and storms on the sixth day in Pittsburgh, so I decided to ride a little bit further to the Cedar Creek campsite. This would make it about a 67-mile ride. The weather was even cooler, prompting me to put on a light jacket in the morning. This middle day of the Gap Trail is always my favorite. The scenery is just amazing. I think 60 to 65 miles a day is a good target, it still leaves enough time to sit and take a break and grab lunch or enjoy the scenery. And this is one of my favorite spots to do that. Ohiopyle has nice scenery, a nice river. It gets a little bit busy with tourists, but I grabbed myself a vanilla shake and freshened up my water bottles again. The Kickstand Cafe in Connellsville. I think it's a good place to pick up a sandwich to take back to the campsite to eat later. Their food is good. They've got a great Cuban. The Round Bottom campsite, at about 100 miles into the trail, not only has shelters, it has plenty of trees for hammocks. One of the downsides, though, is that the water pump, it's not potable water. So you either need to bring it in or find a way to filter it. The Cedar Creek campsite was excellent, in addition to also having shelters to use and plenty of trees. It had fresh water, and it was part of other park areas, so there was a bit more people there. I found a good place to set up my hammock, and I used a shelter for packing up in the morning, as it did rain through the night. The sixth day would be only about 40 miles to get me into Pittsburgh. While the forecast had been for rain and storms throughout the day, set to start at about 1 p.m., overnight the forecast had changed, calling for them not to come in until about 4 p.m., which was excellent. It ended up being blue skies with some clouds the ride in, though the trail was wet from the rain the night before. If anything, this was nice because it kept down the dust. The weather was just excellent. It was a great way to end the ride. I stopped to check out the Dravel campsite, if I'm pronouncing that right, and found that it was another free site with shelters and plenty of trees. I don't think anybody would have a problem hammock camping along either of these two trails. And I don't think I'll do it again by tent. As one comes into McKeesport, the trail changes in its nature a bit. A little more urban for the rest of the way into Pittsburgh. I stopped in McKeesport and ate the sandwich I had with me. There are several bridges on the way into Pittsburgh, several of them taking you over top of train tracks. It was a bit confusing to get to the point in Pittsburgh the first time I did this trail, but now knowing the way, it's very enjoyable. It's safe and along the river. And of the trails that I've done, the ending in Pittsburgh has to be just about the best. Come into the point, the fountain, other cyclists there having finished or beginning their trail. The mist from the fountain is a bit refreshing too. This was a good trip. It was a good 6 days. It was nice to use a hammock for my first time bike touring. And I highly recommend it.